It's a great honor and privilege to be here. Privilege especially as a chair of the committee that consists of very distinguished members. Professor Karl-Heinz Feger, he's here. Dr. Hannah Manjaya from Maputo. Professor Adelaide Nardoki from Brazil, and Professor Wim Wiersen, who was here first day, Wednesday. So it's really a great privilege, honor to be member of the advisory committee. Especially for me, it is an honor indeed because I have been associated with UNU-FLORES from day one, December 10, 2012, and I have seen this institute bloom, mature, and a very, very proud member of the UNU family, making tremendous progress already. And this conference has been a great success from any index that we have. And as everybody will know, that it has already made its impact. I want to explain, to begin with, the International Year of the Soil, which it is UN's 2015 International Year of the Soil, and its objectives of the 68th UN General Assembly, which listed things like to create full awareness of civil society and decision makers about the fundamental roles of soils to human life, and to advance full recognition of the prominent contribution of soils to food security, climate change, adaptation, mitigation, essential ecosystem services, poverty alleviation, and sustainable development. There have been many other objectives, but one of the principal one is to promote effective policies and actions for sustainable management and protection of the soil resources. The NEXUS approach is something which is very dear to UNU-FLORES, and I thought I better look up the history. When John Muir, many of you know the Sierra Club, he was founder of that, associated with that very well. He said, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And that's what our very first opening speaker said, everything is connected to everything else. I think that sums up very well the NEXUS approach. After that, Barry Commoner, 1972, wrote a book called The Closing Circle. This book has 4 chapters. The chapter 1 says everything is connected to everything else. Everything in nature must go somewhere. You let the water, pesticides, herbicide, fertilizer, they have to go somewhere. Mother Nature knows best. If you make a mistake, our mother will forgive us, but not Mother Nature. And there is no such thing as a free lunch. Everything has a price. Those of you who have not seen it, The Closing Circle by Barry Commoner, unfortunately he passed away the same month when the Eco Summit was held in Columbus, Ohio. And those of you who may not remember him, he was a professor, the professor of ecology who also fought as an independent candidate against Ronald Reagan. The question about the NEXUS approach. The questions have remained the same ever since the humanity began its quest for food, fiber, fuel. Whether we were 1 million, 2 million, 10 million, billion, the questions have remained the same. The answer to that question has changed with every generation, depending on what our needs are, depending on what our scientific knowledge is. Therefore, the answer to the question of soil, water, waste nexus has been changing with every generation. It will continue changing as we progress in our science. Sustainable agriculture, or sustainable development, as the UN likes to call it, is not a very new concept either. The first written record I could see was 116 to 27 BC from a Roman philosopher. And in Latin, he said the sustainable land management is the system that the land produces the highest in perpetuity forever. That was more than 2,000 years ago. And since then, many others, this book that was written is given here. Many others who have come up. I came up with the Kitab al-Falaha. Those of you who understand what the Kitab, written by Ibn al-Awam, a Moorish philosopher, in the book on agriculture in the 12th century. He, in fact, gave a very precise definition of soil quality. The first step in the science of agriculture is the recognition of soils and of how to distinguish that which is of good quality and that which is of inferior quality. And he who does not possess this knowledge lacks the first principles and deserves to be regarded as ignorant. Sometime I think we still are. He further went on to say that one must also take into consideration the depth of the soil, depth, rooting depth, very important, that we must protect. For it often happens that the surface layer may be dark because of, as we know now, the humus content. There have been many other philosophers who have written about that. In fact, one closer to home in India was Chanakya, who wrote the book Arthashastra, in which the definition of soil and agricultural management, and there is a very nice Chinese book going back to Yuan dynasty, of course, on the same subject, very important. There are many nexus-based global issues, and I'm going to give you a few examples of that which were discussed here. The land, water, atmosphere, climate nexus, the very first day. The societal response to climate change, I'll talk briefly about it. The natural resources and global security, how global security is impacted by natural resource management. The sustainable intensification, we discussed several times, producing more from less. And the urban ecosystem, the subject that we discussed yesterday, and of course the recycling waste. And I'll be coming back to sky farming and space agriculture as part of that. Let's first talk about the ecosystem services. Yesterday and day before, there was this topic many times discussed, and the definition given was the utility, the function, the services provided by ecosystems to benefit humans. I'm not sure if that's correct. The goods and functions provided by ecosystems for nature conservancy. Yes, I agree with that definition. But humans belong to nature. Humans are part of nature. It was Chief Seattle, the Indian Chief Seattle, who said, when humans believe that they own the land, rather than thinking that they belong to the land, the entire concept changes. That is where the definition of ecosystem services of utility to human is rather incomplete, not correct. I think what humans do, which economists tell me, must be profitable. Yes, but to whom? To nature. It must be profitable to nature. And if it's not profitable to nature, it will not be sustainable. It never will be. And that's a very important concept of ecosystem services that our Nexus approach should really consider. Now, climate. It was the opening day. And there has been questioned, has the climate been changing? Is it the weather? Is the climate? We have a confusion. Climate refers to an aggregate of both the average and extreme conditions of temperature, humidity, precipitation, winds, and so many things on a long period of time. The WMO thinks that long period is 30 years. That's the average consensus, is 30 years. But then there's the weather, and it's the Mark Twain. Many of you know who I'm talking about. Climate is what you expect, weather is what you get. And that's as best a definition as you can get. That was the Clemens, whose pen name was Mark Twain. Now, we talked about many things yesterday on the opening day, about the sea level is rising, the temperature is going up, the CO2 is going up, the species are getting extinction, the biomes are changing by every change in 1 degree centigrade, except we never thought, we never discussed, we never considered that Mother Nature never always gives bad things. After all, it was 10,000 years ago, the deglaciation that made agriculture possible as we know it. In fact, in Columbus, Ohio, where I have my office, there's a mile thick ice sheet right there. It was the deglaciation that changed. So I think, yes, things are going to be bad, no question. But those who are going to be opening their eyes to any opportunities that may arise will benefit. And therefore, we as a human must make sure that the humanity cannot afford to overlook any opportunity. I do not know what those opportunities are. That's where we have to get a distinction. That's where the Nexus approach will guide us how to find out those opportunities. And we must be, because the fact remains that ignoring any opportunities that may come our way would be a serious mistake. And we must never forget that. We must never forget that there will be opportunity, because that's not the way otherwise the Mother Nature does. Sustainable Development Goals. We heard quite a lot about it ever since 1992, the UN Rio Conference, and since then many more times. But many times we forget the sustainability without soil, water, vegetation, the biota is not possible. It just cannot be. We have talked about the zero net land degradation, UNCCD's concept. I was the co-author of that article presented at the Rio Plus 20 meeting. Sergio was here, but we didn't really talk about that subject. Why not zero net gaseous emissions? In fact, Obama and China started that dialogue. I was very happy that Secretary of State and President Obama did initiate that discussion even with India. I think it's about time to think, can we have net zero gaseous emission? And there are ways to do that. And then, being the engine of sustainability, achieving sustainable development goals necessitate that soils are the basis of economic, ecologic development. And we must never forget that part. Without that, we can never achieve that goal. Let's think about the climate change for a moment. Where did the gaseous emissions come from? Ever since the agriculture began 10,000 years ago, the deforestation, the fire, the changing of the ecosystem from natural to agricultural establishment, the vegetation changed, we believe, there is an estimate that perhaps from that time till about 1750, the total amount of the carbon emitted from the terrestrial biosphere, that the vegetation and soil, was about 320 gigaton, petagram. From 1750 to 2010, land use conversion, deforestation, primarily in the tropics, added another 136. And between 2010 and 2030, there will be another 30. If you add up 320 plus 136, we're talking about 500 petagram of carbon has come since the beginning of agriculture from the terrestrial biosphere. Let's compare that with fossil fuel combustion. We know much better, much more precisely than what we know about the land use conversion. 1750 to 2010, about 200 petagram, gigaton. 2010 to 2030, in that 20-year period, the same amount, another time. So about 400. The land use conversion has contributed 500 petagram, and fossil fuel to date are 2030, 400. That difference must be understood by policymakers who has to decide how to create net zero emission. Why? Because recarbonization of the terrestrial biosphere is technically feasible. It's possible. We can put the CO2 back, but the fossil fuel we cannot. And I think that distinction the policymaker, the scientific community must make sure that the policymakers understand that the terrestrial biosphere has been depleted by human activity, and that we can do something to put it back. And that something is very important to achieving the net zero carbon emission. And it is that emission from the terrestrial biosphere that has also jeopardized our possibilities of achieving the goals for food, the feed, the fiber, the fuel, and many other things. And it is that thing, the last part, the food, the feed, the fiber, the fuel, and many other commodity on which we depend, that we have no choice but to put back the carbon back into the terrestrial biosphere. And the sidekick of that, the benefit of that, will be also the mitigation of the climate change. But when it comes to the policy, that everybody says, look at me, I'm the mightiest, I'm the most rapid developer in the world, I'm the oldest democracy, I'm the largest democracy. But we forget that we are all on the same ship. We forget the fact that each one of us on this planet is perpetrator and the victim of the same problem. And that fact we must realize. That is going to come through education. That's going to make sure that we have a dialogue with the policymakers on a continuous basis, always thinking that this has to be done. And this is where we have to find, because the humans have not had to deal with such a drastic climate change for the last 10, 12 million years ago, 10, 12,000 years ago. And now the humans with population of sun about 12 billion, getting up to about 9, is going to be a major challenge. And yet we fail to communicate that message to 50 or so head of state that gathered at Rio Plus 20. We failed. And we did not make headway in that. And we need to. We cannot forego those opportunities again. And this is what I mean, we did not communicate. We did not discuss this point. When the first talk was presented, we didn't talk about it. We talk about that the carbon dioxide before the 1750, before the Industrial Revolution, was 280 parts per million. We know that the 2 degrees centigrade that we G20 agreed, that we cannot exceed 560. We should not, otherwise the temperature will go beyond that. We are already 400 parts per million. 560 minus 400 is 164 or 160. 1 gigaton translates into 1 parts per million in the atmosphere. So 160 times 4 is 640. The humanity has at the most 640 petagram of carbon from fossil fuel to burn. No more. The question that the UN must answer, the UN United Nations University has an important role to answer, is that this pie of 650 petagram, how do you divide that pie amongst the nations of the world? What is a just way to do that? I have no answer. But I think the global community has to really find an answer to that question, which is very important. And the biofuels is not necessarily a very proper solution either. So I think trying to find out a proper solution to that is very important. And going back to recarbonization of the biosphere, we got atmosphere here, 800 petagram of the carbon pool, 400 parts per million, increasing at a rate of 4.3. We have a land use conversion, deforestation, primarily in Sumatra and Brazil and so forth, adding another 1 gigaton every year, the soil respiration 60. On the other hand, we have net primary productivity that goes back into the terrestrial biosphere. We have soil erosion contributing some, and of course, we have weathering going the other way around. And this link that to the so-called missing carbon. If you do the global carbon budget, the combustion of fossil fuel adds another 10 petagram. Ocean absorbed about 2.5 net. This is the nexus part of climate, vegetation, water, soil, global carbon budget, which again, the nexus approach done at different levels. And that level may be plot scale, level may be county scale, maybe a watershed scale or a national scale is really critical to answer that question. How are we going to reverse that trend? How are we going to put the carbon back in the atmosphere? Can soil carbon sequestration mitigate climate change? Absolutely not. It's not possible. Why it's not possible? The maximum capacity is about 1 petagram of carbon per year, 1. We burning by fossil fuel 10. How can you mitigate 10 by 1? Our lifestyle has to change, our thinking has to change, which sometime will require a very different kind of procedure. But putting that carbon back has numerous benefits, which we cannot forget. And important there, of course, is the nature conservancy. How much carbon can we make an impact? We have 400 petagram to 2 meter depth in the soil. So you can make an assumption that we are going to increase carbon by 1% in 10 years, if it's possible. That's 24 petagram. 1 petagram translates to about 0.47 parts per million. The sink capacity of 1% increase in soil carbon is about 11 parts per million. You can make a decision how many 11 multiple can you do by following policy of recarbonization of the soil in the biosphere. It's a simple, rough calculation. We have no way to really mitigate, because fossil fuel combustion is much more overriding. Where are the possibilities? Where are the bright spots and where are the hot spots, which United Nations University and other institutions should consider? Of course, the upper part, the Arctic region is very important, because there's a lot of carbon in the permafrost soils here. If that melts, we really got a problem. We really have a major problem, because this part itself contains about 1,500 petagram of carbon, which is already frozen. The next important part is the Himalayan region. Several rivers, I think 7 of them, including Indus, Ganges, many others, on both north and south, feed 2.3 billion people, 2.3 billion. That's a very large population. So that part is going to be a problem if we ignore it. A very important problem, all the way from Iran to Cambodia. And the third biosphere, which is important, the tropics. The vegetation, the soil of the tropical part is very important. So if we were to select some benchmark sites to do something important, I think it are these regions where we really have to pay a major emphasis to. Whatever we do, there is no panacea. There's not one. There's no silver bullet. That sustainable intensification, producing more from less. There may be technologies such as conservation agriculture, agroforestry, micro drip irrigation, integrated nutrient management, disease suppressive soil, precision agriculture, farming system analysis, GMOs, the Nexus approach, whatever you want to call it, the climate resilient. Each one of these have trade-off. They have negative things. The question is to find out those niches which has lesser negative. Remember, it goes back to the laws of ecology. There is no such thing as a free lunch. There is no free price. Everything has a price. The question is which one, which we have to decide, which will eventually lead us, perhaps nutritional sensitive agriculture. Why nutrition sensitive? We talk about 1 billion hungry people, but there are 3 billion malnourished, hidden hunger, suffering from micronutrient deficiency and other, and you cannot get those micronutrients from pills. They must come from good quality soil and vegetation, which are very important part. One thing I want to mention about recarbonization of the soil in the biosphere, again, there is no such thing as a free lunch, there's a price. You got a crop residue, and you want to put the crop residue back in the soil to convert it into humus. To convert that crop residue into humus is going to require biological transformation. This biological transformation requires nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur to be exact, because the CN ratio in residue is 100, in humus 12. That means nitrogen must be more in the humus. The C to P ratio 200 to 15 humus. That means there must be more phosphorus. This carbon to sulfur ratio in residue is about 500 versus 70. That means the humus is enriched in nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So the farmers who are going to add their crop residue, rather than selling the market for biofuel production, cellulosic, they have to also add nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur to convert the residue into humus. And if you think they should do free of charge for the benefits of the rest of the family of the human society, think again. Not possible. Why should they do it? So trading nutrients for carbon, if you want to convert 10,000 kilograms of biomass into humus, you're going to require additional 800 or so kilograms nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, which really has a price, and they must be paid through ecosystem services. That's what I was talking about, that the ecosystem services must benefit who? The nature. That's what we are talking about, and we are, of course, part of the nature. The bicycle that is going to deliver us 9.5 billion people has already left home. And whether we like it or not, you can't stop it. The best contraceptive is education. The best contraceptive is better health. Education of the women. And there is very little you can do between now. I know Rabbi Mukhtiar asked us question, what can we do? Rabbi, that bicycle left already. I think what we can pray now is that the occupants of that bicycle arrive their place, destination safe from diarrhea and HIV and Ebola and many other problems. And nothing happened to them in between. But we, as those who are here, must be prepared to receive those 2.5 billion guests. They are coming. They are coming. They are coming for dinner. We need to be prepared for them. So what do we need to prepare for? First is what impact they will have. The impact those guests are going to have is I equal to PAT. P is population, A the affluence by which that population lives, the T the technology they use to live. So understanding the nexus PAT is very important part. The other thing is, supposing, let's look at the urbanization. That question was discussed yesterday. Take the case of cities in India. Delhi increased by a factor of 20 between 1950 and 25. Calcutta by 5. Bombay by a factor of 9. Pune by 11. Hyderabad by 8. Bangalore by a factor of 14. Madras by 6. Everywhere the city increasing tremendously. And all that population that's coming is going to the cities. We heard that. And what happens when population goes to the city? For 40,000, it takes 40,000 hectares to accommodate, provide shopping mall, and provide airports, and provide roads to 1 million people. We are increasing those guests on the bicycle 75 million a year. Multiply 75 by 4, you got 3 million hectares. 3 million hectares of prime land going under buildings and concretes and surface seal. Something we can't forget. By 2015, there will be 236 cities in the world with a population of more than 10 million. And a city of population of 10 million requires 6,000 tons of food a day. And that food carries nutrients coming from all the way from California to Ohio, and bananas coming from Guatemala and elsewhere, and those nutrients never get back. Rather than becoming a source of recycling, they are really a liability problems. And when we were talking about the urban design yesterday, I was very impressed, but we didn't talk about this problem. We did not. So, what about producing food in the cities itself so that we don't have to bring? So let's talk about vertical farm. How about glass structures which are only meant for growing food, recycling the gray water and the black water so you can produce the food in them. There are many, many benefits so that we don't. There are examples in Singapore and Chicago where those things are happening. I don't need to go into detail. The fact is there will be no soil degradation either. So we could really recycle some of those waste. The urban agriculture would really become a very important part. We should think about having green rooftop greenhouses to grow vegetables. Why not? It's a very important thing. The planting and harvesting and many other costs are much more less in vertical farm than regular farm. But I'm also hoping that as a soil scientist, perhaps we should think about growing food without using soil. Why do we have to continuously use soil, which has so many ecosystem services of interest to nature, to do something so primitive as producing food? Can we save soil for other purposes and learn how to grow food without soil? Soil-less culture. There are many examples. I'll talk about that in a moment. But right now, let's talk about the global security, which depends on the food. On the one side, we have security of political, economic, social. On the other side, the national, regional, and international security. At the center of all that is, of course, a soil of good quality. And a soil good quality leads to the quality of the water resources, the quality of the energy, the climate security, the food security, and eventually the national security, the whole chain. The entire chain depends on that. And it is this web which really determines the global security. And the reason this web determines the global security because even now, 38% of the terrestrial surface is under agriculture, 75% is allocated to raising animals, 70% of the global freshwater withdrawal is used for irrigation, 30 to 35% of the greenhouse gas emissions are contributed by agriculture, and yet 1 in 7 people are hungry. So we got some problems. Somewhere along the line, we really need to improve the way we produce food and the way we eat food and the way we perhaps waste food, which we have talked quite a lot about it. And then there's a great nexus between poverty and, of course, the global security. Because many times we talk about patriotism and love. Here is something to think about. Love and business and family and religion and art and patriotism are nothing but shadows of words when a person is starving. Ask a hungry man, what do you think about culture and arts and patriotism? There are not many troubles in the world more alarming than those caused by fire in the pit of an empty stomach. That fire is so hot, so intense. It's hard to imagine. And that's what causes any kind of ism that you can think of. And unless that fire is extinguished, it's very difficult to extinguish those isms. And the only way that you can extinguish that fire is by one simple thing, a piece of bread. When people are poverty-stricken, we talk about soil degradation. When people are poverty-stricken, they are desperate, they are miserable, they are hungry, they pass their miseries and hunger and trouble to the land. And that's the way it is. That's the way how it goes. Lake Chad could be the same as the Aral Sea Basin, could be the same as the Indus Basin. Somewhere, a beautiful lake. I used to be there in the late 60s. I know how it was at that time. We know what has happened. So somewhere we have to think about the soil-less culture so that don't destroy the resources for many other purposes. We have to think about developing agriculture which is based on aquaponics, hydroponics, aeroponics, aerofarms. I think the traditional systems have to eventually give, so we can save that very precious soil so that those 10 billion guests who are going to come, they have something other than feedlots to feed on. We should give them a decent way of life. And this approach would save many things. Yesterday, we talked about the land grab problems. Imagine if we have ways to producing food without soil, obviously the issue of land grab would not arise. The so-called soil refugees which we have now, the boatloads coming across the Mediterranean, perhaps would not exist either if there was a way to look at. So coming toward the end, Reza, I would like to suggest the path forward. And there are ways to do that. Rather than a silver bullet or a panacea, we must look for multiple paths. We cannot afford to be myopic and locked into any specific strategy, because there is no such thing as a silver bullet. We should really think about some revolutionary approaches, and none of those revolutionary approaches can be at all useful without education. And I'm very glad that you have already got 5 PhD scholars from around the world, a great start with, in combination with TUD that will leave. And I think I got a picture of those 5 brilliant scholars along with our director and other staff of UNU, and I really congratulate and welcome this initiative. But still, we have a need for action. This is the time to demonstrate impacts of the Nexus approach to addressing global issues. I think we should go beyond the platform of discussions. We should actually put into practice, show some key locations. I would say prioritize. We cannot do everything together, but I think we must prioritize and do something. And there is, of course, an urgent need to translate knowledge and goodwill. And UNU-FLORES does have a lot of goodwill into action. I think considering the fact that this is a year of the soil, I'm going to close by saying that we have quite a lot of icons which have been presented around the world, whether icon is to indicate global warming by polar bear, or by chimpanzees, or by panda, or by tortoise. But the real icon on which we think the global and nature conservancy depend is, of course, the soil and its environment. The vegetation that it supports, the flora and fauna that it provides, and of course the nexus of the water, the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, sulfur, the whole web of soil biota that works together, which really makes dead into living and makes life on this planet possible. And we should really create a fact that soil is life and life is soil, and this motto we really need to create and enhance global awareness about. And I really think that your Nexus approach and UNU-FLORES will do that very nicely. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We have a very short time, but I cannot prevent myself to invite 1 or 2 comments, questions, reactions to what we heard. Yes, please, take the mic.
Sir, it is very hard for me to imagine food production without soil, so I want to just reflect on that. Food production without soil
Or grow
is
food
very
without
hard,
soil?
very hard to imagine.
Well, I know, good things are hard. It's very, but eventually, think about irrigation, how much water we waste. So soil we are using as a medium for production, roots. Root can be grown in aquaponics, in hydroponics, in artificial soil. We have a lot of waste material, newspapers, cardboards, we could create we have to begin to think about it. It's a very important strategy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Lal, for, okay, one more, if you allow just one more question or comment, and then we go to the last part of
Good afternoon. My name is Mauricio Samaya. I'm from UNEP-DTU Partnership. It was a really good presentation, Professor. However, I think we are forgetting one important issue. What is the vision and the vision of economic growth development? I think that this is one of the fundamental issues that also we need to think about in an overall perspective. What is the way that we would like to see the development in the future and what we expect? And I agree with you that this is one of the fundamental discussions that we need to clear. And probably we will not have a single answer for this, but at least I believe that is important in order to tackle climate change and the other issues. It's not only about optimization of the resources, it's also about what the humanity believes, what is the economic growth. Thank you.
I think it was a general comment, and I really have no any other addition to what you have added. I think the issues that you're bringing up are very relevant. My personal response would be that soil can play an important part in addressing those issues, but some of the issues are so overwhelming, like the fossil fuel emission, and the capacity of the soil to solve that is very limited. I think it was Knut Ehlers who said during the panel discussion before that soil should never be taken for granted, and I'll repeat what he said. We must never take them for granted.
Thank you very much.